All right, everybody. Today I've got an amazing guest on the show. Her name is Wendolyn Holland, and she is a woman of many talents. I'm so blessed to have her on. And it's also a blessing, even though we actually haven't met for coffee, which we will do that. She lives here in Sun Valley, which is my home residence now for the last 8, going on 9 years. And to me, it's such a blessing. But first of all, Wendolyn, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I've just come home. It's so good to be back in the bubble. I've spent a couple weeks away with family in Ohio, and so coming home is always such a blessing, even though we need some snow. I did bring a suitcase full of snow back from Ohio with me, so I'm going to head out to the mountain later and put my pile of snow there.
Yeah, no, that's all good. And certainly throughout the West, we're having very contrasting climates between the West, really a very kind of warmer temperatures and dry compared to the East Coast, which is this atomic bomb of cold and everything else that's dropping on, either in the South, which is I'm sure having a lot of damaging effects on the different, oranges and different produce that they crank out down there. So I want to talk to you today because on New Year's Eve, I was over at a friend's house and there was a book, a gigantic book. Actually, I've never seen a book that big that was on the coffee table, which is what this is designed to do. It's really an art piece, but you decided to dig back in history and go back. And I'm so fascinated because every year, Sun Valley, our little resort town of maybe 5,000 people when it's not flooded during the main holidays, um, it's voted best resort in the US or North America. And that's has happened multiple times. And there's got other conventions, Allen Company and so on and so forth, that come here and they could go anywhere that they chose. And I've been all over the world and I've been in all these little ski towns and they choose to come to Sun Valley because of the magic, the energy, and the vibe that we have here. So you are the author of this beautiful Sun Valley book, and I want to dig into why you wanted to just endeavor this because this sucker is thick and it's big and it's got the most beautiful pictures and the historical aspect of it. So let's just go back to the why.
The why. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me, Mark. I'm really excited about this. How auspicious that you ran into it on New Year's Eve. That's a great sign. So I wrote this book because, first of all, I was in school. I was in college. I was a history and environmental studies major at Yale and had to write a thesis as required for both of those majors. And the big brass ring, the thing that all history majors had to go for, the one thing that was just so elusive was to find original source material, which in a lot of areas, in most areas of history, it's already been gone over. But in this area, it wasn't. And I found here at our the regional history department of the community library in Ketchum, which is still to this day my favorite library in the world, um, found an amazing treasure trove of original source material on the history of the town, the history of the resort, the first destination ski resort in the U.S. Um, but um, but I had to overcome some things. I really had to justify to my professors and my advisors at the time working on a topic that wasn't quite so serious enough for Yale, right?
Mhm.
The history of skiing, the history of a ski resort in Idaho, a little obscure. And I had to justify to them why this was a worthy topic. And to me, it's entirely clear. It's the pattern of Western expansion, of settlement, of the relationship of the larger economic systems in our country and now in global systems in our world, and how these remote, isolated still, these remote communities retain their relevance, their charm, and why they are so special to the larger economy. And how this was just part of the patterns of westward expansion, railroad expansionism. I was very lucky at Yale to study under Howard Lamar, under Bill Cronin. Actually, right behind me, that's my Bill Cronin map, my
Oh,
map from his History of the American West class. And my essay advisors, Jay Gitlin, he is currently the head of the undergraduate program, the undergraduate history program at Yale. And this is a long line of historians of the American West. Ned Blackhawk is part of that lineage. Justin Farrell, the author of Billionaire Wilderness, which talks a great deal about Jackson Hole. And another gentleman who's part of this lineage, Daniel Grant, he's part of the Ivan Doig Center up at Montana State. I'm speaking at a lecture at his event in a couple of months. So there's this lineage of historians of the American West based at Yale. Frederick Jackson Turner, all, part of that scene. And so to justify to them, sort of to go to the Oracle and say, this is a worthy topic, that was sort of my first hurdle in overcoming fear, frankly. And I really wanted to pursue this topic. And I had a buddy who was 1 year ahead of me, a dear friend, a gal named Eleanor, was 1 year ahead of me. And she had written her senior thesis for the same two departments, history of the American West and environmental studies. She had written her senior thesis on the history of her family compound up at Acadia National Park. So she kind of paved the way for me a little bit. So I'm always grateful to Eleanor for that. But once I got the thumbs up, it was just diving into the original research that was here. And so I was able to spend my first summer living here in between junior and senior years at Yale, summer of 1990. You can do the math and then figure out how old I am. And dive in with the research. So it was really all about the treasure trove of original source material and the amazing library that we have here. And I could go on and on about our library. It was started by a group of women, land donated by the Union Pacific Railroad. I was lucky enough to serve on the board of the library a number of years ago and still strongly support the library.
Love it, love it. Okay, so let's go into some juicy details. And a lot of
Okay.
it, you were starting to dive into the Western expansion, and of course, way back, Lewis and Clark and others who were making their way, and ultimately out to California and places like that. But I can't even begin to imagine the conditions and just the brutal environment, especially when you start dropping down into Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, where the temperate climate, it's, as you know, because we both live here, can get, unbearable during the wintertime. And so in a covered wagon and things like that, and of course, we have wagon days and other things. But let's go back to where did this town really take shape? And I'm guessing when I say this, and I haven't done the research like I should do, but for some reason, what's popping in my mind is 1923 is when things started to pop here. So give me
Way
the
later than that.
okay,
Way later than that. So we've got you're into football, right?
a little
So
bit.
we've got our 49ers, right?
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
gold was discovered in California. So keep
yeah.
that in your mind. So it was all about mineral exploration, right? And then we've got the Golden Spike Railroad of the crossing of the two lines coming from east and west, just north of Salt Lake and Promontory, Utah. That's 1869.
Okay.
So we look at 1869 as the beginning of that era where corporate it influences very much New York, San Francisco. These corporate influences were trying to get the transportation resources to the West. A lot of that meant displacing the indigenous peoples who had been here for time immemorial, um, getting the transportation resources here so that we could extract the minerals. So it was all about mineral exploration. And along with that comes land speculation as well. The railroads, of course, were able to acquire incredibly extensive land resources for the rights of way that adjoining all the lands that they were crossing. So we've got the railroad, the main part of the railroad crossing 1869, and then these little spur lines headed north and south into the valleys, happening in the successive decades following that. And we've got the first The Oregon Short Line, small company that was later acquired, Oregon Short Line Company, making its way to Haley in 1882 and then up to Ketchum in 1883. But it wasn't until really 1879, no railroad here yet, but 1879 that the first group of speculators, individual entrepreneurs, Dave Ketchum among them, came up to Ketchum and discovered lead and galena around here. You hearken back, though, to Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark, of course, is 1846. They're making their way across in an incredible expedition, very much enabled by the native populations going across the country. And there's an incredible book that I cannot recommend enough to readers about this called Lewis and Clark from Indian Eyes. And that book has a really good connection to our valley here, because of course Lewis and Clark were nowhere near here. They're further up north, like Lolo Pass, some great ski areas up there. But Diane Josephi Peavy, an amazing woman, married into the Peavy family. Her father, her late father, Alvin Josephi, was the anthologist who compiled Lewis and Clark through Indian Eyes. Amazing book. Okay, so Lewis and Clark, 1804, 5, 6, and then the first recorded white man to have made his way down here into the valley, into the Wood River Valley, was 1824, Alexander Ross with the Pacific Fur Company. But again, it's this similar idea of these corporate interests. Pacific Fur Company, of course, on their way looking for beaver and other furs, but it was the corporate interests looking to extract furs, minerals, and getting into the area. So they weren't really looking for land. They weren't looking for land to settle. They weren't looking to, make their way in the wilderness. They were really looking for resource extraction.
Yeah,
And
I so
they
let me
found the
I get
yeah,
that. And that was what was going on at that time, right? In the late 1800s, right? And so I want to get more into the development where there's this big idea, right? Where somebody comes in behind all these people that have been coming, and it was more for just actual resources, right? And things that people need to, you know, uh, food, clothing, and shelter. Those are the kind of the three big essentials. But now somebody comes here and they stand in the middle of this valley and they're looking around and they're looking up at the top, and there's this light bulb that goes off about let's turn this thing into a ski resort. Okay.
slightly different the way that happened. So the railroad was already here,
Mm-hmm.
making its way, successive improvements over the decades. And then a different story back in New York, young, very young, in his 20s, Averill Harriman,
Yeah.
uh, chairman of the Union Pacific Railroad. His father had passed away when Averill himself was quite young, so he really headed into corporate leadership at a quite a young age in his 20s and 30s. Was a bit of a playboy, is sort of the old term of the way that is described. Modern times, we describe that behavior a little differently. But he certainly saw the trends in the passenger revenue dipping in the winter. And he saw that the Central Pacific, the railroads to the south, were doing much better with their winter passenger revenue. Passenger revenue had dropped after World War I, and he was really looking for a way to boost winter passenger revenue. He was hanging out in Europe. He had friends who were in Europe. He was part of European financial circles. So he was aware that there were already groups of British who were headed to Switzerland and Austria to ski in the winter. That was already a thing. There were already clubs headed to Kitzbühel, St. Anton, those areas. So he saw that culture, that very elite culture, where it seemed to defy nature that we could go out and recreate in the middle of the winter. And that's a climatic thing, right? To have
Mm-hmm.
that super dry air in the mountains where we can be perfectly comfortable in just a t-shirt recreating out in the mountains. He saw that behavior, wanted to replicate it in the US. Now, it had already started just a little bit going north from Grand Central Station in New York, going up to New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine, there were already some tiny little resorts, but they weren't grand resorts. And his vision was, hey, let's make this grand resort. So he hired this guy. It's called a count. The titles are free and titles are very free in Austria. So was he of actual royalty? Who actually knows? A lot of people have that moniker count, even to this day in Austria. So he hired this guy who he knew through social circles, gave him a pass on the Union Pacific Railroad. I would love to have a pass like that.
Hmm.
Gave him a pass to travel all over the Union Pacific line in the West, nobody else's line, only the Union Pacific line, and find the best ski mountain. So Count Felix Safgotch went around to a whole bunch of places that we know of now as being excellent ski mountains. Oregon, Jackson Hole, Colorado, he went to Vail, he went to Aspen, and every place he was a little like Goldilocks, right? Kind of going to all these places. And, Aspen was too high. Jackson was too far away from the main line, and the state of Wyoming was unwilling to keep Teton Pass open. There was already a road over Teton Pass, but the state of Wyoming was unwilling to keep it open over the winter. And obviously, Teton Pass had a rough time last winter with a pretty serious collapse.
Hmm.
And by the time he made it here, and he kept a really good journal. It's great. We have a lot of the archives from Averell Harriman with these individual handwritten letters from the Count back to Harriman in New York, keeping him updated on his daily diary of looking at all these places. He'd almost given up until one of the railroad engineers said, hey, you should really check out this place up around Ketchum and Haley, the Oregon Short Line, going straight up north from Shoshone. And he came in at night. The line came in at night, and he was pretty grumpy about it. Was not terribly optimistic. Thought the valley was too wide because he was really looking for it to be more hemmed in, like
Hmm.
a European valley, like a European ski valley, like Courchevel and such. But when he woke up here in the morning, stayed at what used to be Bald Mountain Hot Springs Hotel. He saw the bright light. He saw Baldy, and he said, "This is it. This is our place." He found the perfect mountain. And I still believe that we do have the best ski mountain in all of North America. We need a little snow this year. This is our down year. This is our year to get work done.
Okay. So, question for you. So, going back when he was at the Bald Mountain, those old log cabins I used to stay in them way back when, they were amazing and they're so old school and nostalgic and all those things. But again, what year was he standing where he woke up in the morning and looked up in the mountains and probably the sun was coming in, where he had this awakening where this is where I want to expand this idea?
1935.
1935. Okay.
Early in 1935 is when that happened.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I think, for people who don't know, so Haley, again, is about 10, 12 miles away from Ketchum. Ketchum is about a 2.5 hour car ride from Boise, Idaho, which a lot more people know about. And I think one of the things in the context of all these other resorts that you're talking about now, well developed in Colorado, Aspen, Telluride, uh, Vail, places like that. Then you go down to Wyoming and you're talking about Jackson Hole. And over in Montana, you've got a couple mountains there, Big Sky and Big Mountain and things like that. But one thing that's really been unique is that especially more than anything, that what's closest to us is down Park City. And they're all good. They're just different. And one of the things that's been here is really they've retained that culture and the discipline of not sucking up to gigantic hotels, the Montage, the Four Seasons. So we don't have any of that here. And that's one thing
Starting.
I know a little bit, it's starting just a little bit. But at the end of the day, I mean, that took what, 12 years to like, it was a big hole
Yep.
for a long time. But at the end of the day, I doubt that's going to happen at the base of the mountain. And just a lot of the charm of the character, with many, many structures around here. I know there's redeveloping and people are improving all the time, but there's still a heck of a lot of cabins around here that were probably sitting here for the last 50, 60 years. And so that's one of the things that I have found that have been, one of the charming things that people have never been here before, like, oh, wow, this is a really cool spot.
The charm, and it's actually charm worth preserving. I can tell you why we've retained this, we call it the essential funk.
Yeah.
why we've been able to retain it and why it's critical to keep on with those efforts to do so. Um, so I'll just take Vail. Interstate 70 runs through Vail.
Yeah.
There's so much traffic going to those places. Jackson Hole had the benefit of having the giant national parks right nearby and the massive traffic that comes in the summer. Um, Park City, of course, and all the other resorts in the Wasatch down around Salt Lake have the proximity of Salt Lake in a major metropolitan area. We don't have that in Idaho. Our population is more sparse. And I've described it in the book as a geographic barrier that really was created by the Snake River Plain, created by, if you will, there's a stable, stationary hot spot in the Earth's magma, and the plates uh, not drift, they shift on top of it. And it's created this kind of a smiley face, if you will, the Snake River Plain, which has some really interesting um, hot springs and geologic activity that currently sits under Yellowstone. It's why we have all the amazing, the mud pots and the geysers and everything that's happening under Yellowstone. That activity occurred all along the Snake River Plain,
Hmm.
and it created some really ugly, harsh, uh, craggy rocks that you can't walk with bare feet over. And you can imagine how harsh it would be for wagon wheels and horse hooves to try and cross. And that evidence of that is down at Craters of the Moon National
Mhm.
Monument, just to the east of Blaine County, to the east of Cary, Idaho. And that's, 10,000, 100,000 years from now, that's what Yellowstone is going to look more like. But that actually caused a really big barrier to get beyond, to go explore. So we don't have as much settlement in those areas. Another reason why our settlement is sparser here is literally because of it being slightly more to the west, being in the Intermountain West. So Oregon Trail travelers, when they were coming in the hundreds of thousands in the 1850s, 1860s, they would reach Idaho, the portions of the Oregon Trail, California Trail that pass through Idaho. They would reach here so late in the season, coming up in like August, September, that they were already tired. They were already, um, they weren't ready to settle there. It was really about a seasonality to it. So we don't have a ton of settlement further up in the Idaho areas. In addition, north of us, we have the largest roadless area in the lower 48. So we're not having that settlement pressure here in the Ketchum Sun Valley area. We don't have that settlement pressure coming in from the north either. So we're really this kind of isolated community, isolated by so much geography. And put on top of that is the fact that the quality of the rocks here, what's in the rocks, the geologic substrate, we didn't have a big gold rush here. There's some gold pockets off to the Smoky Mountains to the west of us, but our mineral rushes here were more about silver, lead, later uranium. So the gold rushes that hit in California and Colorado and such, we didn't have those rushes. So we just didn't have the masses of settlement that other areas did. And it's those masses of settlement then that give rise to the larger communities, the concentrations of wealth. So we've been able to keep just a little bit under the radar here. And I think that leads to our charm. I think that it helps explain why it is we don't have just the massive populations that the other places do. It really comes back to rocks.
Yeah, well, you talk about in Salt Lake City, you're talking about an international airport, and you're talking about a whole lot of convenience that from LA to Salt Lake City, you can be there in an hour, 20 minutes, and 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, you're at the resort skiing. So, and here it takes effort, and
Yeah.
that's it. Okay, we have about 5 more minutes, and
Okay.
I want to make sure that we don't miss taking like we've talked about the 1800s and 1934 and kind of like why and how this whole region evolved, and I want to go to today.
Yeah.
Okay. And the relevance of today as opposed to the original goals way back when. And let's talk about that for a minute.
Great, thank you. I am so fortunate to have the support of our previous political leadership as well as our current political leadership here in the Ketchum area. And I was just named, voted by my peers last night as chair of the Historic Preservation Commission in the
Of
city of
course.
Ketchum.
Yeah.
And we're at a really incredible inflection point here. The forces of capitalism are coming in and they're coming in hard. I'm a capitalist, but I also know that capitalism can be conscious and we can make decisions in our community about the kinds of buildings, structures, districts we want to retain and where we're willing to let capitalism run more freely. Planning and zoning has a really big role in all of this to make sure that we are retaining the charm, the culture, the character of our town. And we talk about the character of our town being composed of both the people as well as the structures. And we've got some amazing buildings in downtown Ketchum in the community core as well as out beyond. And I believe it is these tiny structures that are really built at the human scale before masses of metal were coming in and all, that really lend the charm to our communities.
Yeah.
I believe these buildings are worth saving because they help retain our charm. A lot of people have said that they've seen more changes in Ketchum in the last 5 years than they have in the last 30. COVID
Mhm.
pandemic, 2020, 21 was, and let's hope we're done, had a pretty big impact on our community with massive influx of population. And so I believe now it is incumbent on us to make decisions as a community about which structures, which district, which areas are worth retaining so that we retain our charm.
Love it. Love it. Okay. The final question for you. Again, I want to go back to the first thing that came out of my mouth about how spectacular all this detail and people, you haven't seen it, and I'm describing this to you right now, but the pictures and the photos and the descriptions, I mean, it's really a work of art. Here it comes. There it is. Gigantic, extraordinary history, and that's what it
Thank
is.
you.
And where can people find that book?
They can find that book right now two places. First of all, it's in a lot of libraries. It's also in some very beautiful homes, as you found on the
Yeah.
coffee table on New Year's Eve. It's for sale in two places right now. One is our favorite bookstore,
Oh,
Chapter One,
yep.
and another is the Willow Papery store that's also in Ketchum, right down the street from the library on Sun Valley Road.
Right. Well, that's here, and that's to a local audience, but this podcast goes out to people all over the US and North America and worldwide. And so for those people who
Give me a call. I can be reached at w@wendolyn.com. Sometimes they come up on Amazon, but they end up being really expensive. So give me a call. One of these days I'll get around to reprinting or doing another book. But right now I'm more focused on the community service aspect of
well,
this.
I'm going to be your first customer, so I will for sure be reaching out to you to get that
Cool.
book. Okay.
Awesome.
All
Thank
right.
you so
Well,
much, Mark.
yeah. Well, you are just a walking encyclopedia of certainly a lot of things, but specifically about this region, and I love it, and you love it, and for the probably different reasons and all the right reasons and all the same reasons. And so for that reason, I'm blessed that you were able to come on and give some context to this area that we call Sun Valley.
I'm so honored to share this time with you, Mark. It's been great to meet you. I look forward to meeting you in person someday soon.
All right, there she is, the one, the only Wendolyn Holland. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.